What's up, guys? I've been helping people evaluate businesses for sale, especially FedEx and bread routes, for over 15 years now. And one of the more common situations I see happen with FedEx routes is that the seller will not provide their tax returns. And a lot of people wonder if this is a typical thing or if this is a red flag or whatever. Now, there's a couple of reasons why the sellers don't typically provide those tax returns. And then there's a couple more reasons why I don't like tax returns. And I don't even look at them in the evaluation process that I basically help people go through. And so one of the big things and the reasons why we don't see tax returns being provided is there's typically no upside potential for the seller. So for example, let's say that the seller has written off everything under the sun, and even though he's truly making $300,000 net, he is showing a loss. And so the tax return shows this loss. And so whenever the seller provides his tax return to someone, they're like, oh my gosh, this is a terrible business. This is no good. And of course, the CPA that they want to have evaluate their business, which, by the way, CPAs cannot adequately do this because they don't understand the FedEx contract. It's not a true independent business that you can evaluate with just numbers. It's a contractual relationship. And so a lot of times when CPAs see this, they say, hey, this thing is not even profitable. Why would you be interested in this? Like, this is a terrible business. And then people Google and they see online and they see some forums and they say, oh, FedEx routes are terrible. How can anyone make money? Let me just say it like this. There's 6,000 or so contractors out there. They're not running a charity. They're doing it because it's profitable. Okay, so we're going to get the idea that like all the routes are unprofitable and FedEx contractors are the most charitable, philanthropic people ever. And they just like to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars just to lose money. We're going to pretend that that's not accurate because it's not. And we're going to realize that, yes, indeed, there are some contractors that run these things at a loss or significantly below whatever the seller is claiming that they're making. Yes, these things happen. They tend to be a little bit more uncommon in terms of like being completely unprofitable. Now, is it common that the seller has exaggerated his profitability? I'd say 99% of the time. So it's something like that. Anyway, the point is, when a buyer that doesn't really understand this business, they get all of these tax returns, they see that it's losing money, even though the seller claimed that he was making $300,000 net. Well, that's going to scare off that buyer who's going. The other thing is that same buyer says, oh, well, maybe he's just writing everything off. I'll give it to my CPA. They'll look at it. Well, guess what? The thing is so riddled with lies that the CPA is not going to be able to find heads or tails on what's the truth and what's not. So the CPA is not going to like it either. Now let's pretend for a moment that the seller is completely honest and accurate on his tax returns and he shows a loss. Well, guess what? Is it the same situation before where the guy is just lying on his tax returns? He's actually making much more, or is he actually telling the truth? So the seller realizes that no matter whether he's telling the truth about losing a bunch of money or lying about losing a bunch of money, it's not going to look real good for a typical buyer that's looking at these things. So a lot of times the sellers say, hey, you're not going to get to see that. Now, the reason why we see tax returns more often these days, because it used to be that the sellers would never show their tax returns. That was like 10, 15 years ago. That's a long time. That's a long time ago. At this point, they do show their tax returns. They're not lying egregiously in every single way possible. What's happening now is that we do see a lot more people getting loans on these. And of course, the bank, no matter how much they understand or don't understand routes, they like to see tax returns. And so very, very reasonable reason to be able to get a tax return. Now, a lot of times whenever sellers are saying, hey, I'm not going to show you my tax return, we know 9 times out of 10, they're the ones that don't want to deal with the financing. They want to sell very quickly. They don't want to wait 3 months or whatever it's going to take to be able to get through underwriting for an SBA loan and so on and so forth. So some of the sellers are like, hey, my tax returns are completely honest and accurate. They actually show me making money, just like I said I was. But I'm not going to show it to you because I know what you're up to. I know you want to try to get this to a bank. You want to try to see if you can get financing on it. And I'm not interested. I want to sell this thing quickly. X, Y, and Z is happening. I need to sell these routes and move or get another opportunity, whatever the reason is. And there's lots of different reasons why people are actually selling as opposed to retiring or whatever. So the reality is that sometimes they just don't show them because they don't want to deal with the banks. And so some of the brokers out there will actually encourage this. They'll say, hey, look, We're going to get a bunch of people interested in this. FedEx routes are pretty hot. We could go down the financing route. The problem is let's say we get one person that seems like they're making it through underwriting, and then whatever reason, it falls through. They use a bank that doesn't know how FedEx routes really work. And maybe the bank claimed that they have financed routes in the past. And sure enough, they financed one route 8 years ago. And now all the lending agents are like, yeah, we financed FedEx routes. And it's like, yeah, you did one. And it was like the best deal of the century. Like, you're not going to be able to finance others. And so the brokers realize this. And the brokers are working in the interest of the seller to be like, hey, I don't get paid unless you get paid. So let's not waste a bunch of time with these people that want to get loans. So let's just say no financing at all, even though the business is very profitable, even though the tax returns are very valid and so on and so forth, showing the actual amounts of net income and whatnot. They're going to say, hey, let's just not deal with it, because if this thing sits on the market for 3 months while we have one person try to go through this process, it falls through, then we're like, this could be a year before we get this thing sold. So let's just not even deal with it. No tax returns, no financing, and that sort of sometimes makes things easier. Now, for a lot of other businesses and other people that own businesses that have sold them, that seems kind of crazy. Like, hey, show your tax returns. That's how we're going to get this thing sold. Because this is a sort of an antiquated thing that's sort of permeated into present day, where back 10, 15 years ago, those bundles of routes that were being sold in the FedEx space were much, much smaller. Now the average price is $1 million. And so before, it was always that like people were just paying cash for these things. Now, like a lot of times when people go to check their checking account, there's not $1 million just sitting there waiting to be deployed. Like that's not what's generally happening. People want to get loans. And more importantly, even if they did have $1 million sitting in their bank account, a lot of the really, really adept, like magnates in business, if you will, that I've worked with over the years, like they don't want to use all that cash. They want to be able to use debt in their favor. They want to be able to have those loans. So there's lots of stuff like that that's going on. The other thing too, and one of the things or the reasons why I don't particularly like tax returns is because if you were just looking at tax returns, what you were doing in your evaluation process is verifying. And I will guarantee you that if you only verify as your method of evaluation and due diligence in the FedEx space, you're going to get screwed, because there's a couple of things that start to happen here. And so one is that everyone thinks that the correlation between revenue and net is fixed. They want to use ideas like margins. They want to say, 23.5% of the gross should be what we're netting. Like that doesn't work. And it doesn't work for a variety of reasons. And I mean a lot of different reasons. But if people can be convinced that margins do work, then what happens is they think, well, I just need to project what this business is going to be doing revenue-wise, what the e-commerce or shipping trends or what's FedEx growth and all this kind of stuff. And then they say, well, next year it's going to be even better. That's not the case. There are some routes out there. In fact, I'd probably say it's a good 50-50 where there is downside potential just as much as there is upside potential. So for example, if the guy's saying, oh, I net $300,000 a year, and you look at the tax returns and you verify everything, you say, wow, he really is making $300,000. What a great seller. Wow, he told us down to the penny. What a great guy. There's more to it than that. You've got to be able to tell, wait a sec, is next year, is this guy going to be making $350,000 to $300,000? Is he going to be making $200,000? Those situations do happen. And so looking at just a tax return to verify where that current profitability level is, yes, we want to see what he's currently making, because we've got to have some spot to be able to say, hey, we're going up or we're going down from here. So my point is, it's not that verification is bad. I'm saying verification alone will get you screwed. You have to be able to see these other things that are going on in these businesses, because if you're just looking at what the net income is, it makes you ignore the ease of management. What are our skills, expertise, time that we have to bring to this business to be successful? And it also ignores our sustainability. Again, $300,000 a year doesn't matter if the seller really made that. If next year it disappears, goes away, contract doesn't get renewed, contract changes, that's more often not than, a contract that doesn't get renewed altogether. But the point is you've got to be able to see this three-dimensional picture of what's going on in the business, why is this guy really wanting to sell as opposed to just saying retiring or pursuing other opportunities or whatever. Like when you can see all the other aspects of this, again, this game gets a lot clearer, gets easier. And then you can start to say, oh, this is why this guy wants to sell. Because next year it's going to make 200,000. Hey, are we okay with that? Yeah, we actually are. You know, as long as we're over 150,000, we're okay with that. Okay, well, what do we need to do? Oh, we need to adjust our offer price. Because even though he was making 300,000, you know, over the last 12 months or whatever, well, he's not going to continue to make that. We have judged his sustainability to be low. So when you're looking at tax return, all you're seeing is where we are currently, well, technically the last 12 months or whatever it may be. And so it ignores those other aspects. And so those other aspects are massively important when we evaluate these types of businesses. But also secondarily, a lot of times the tax returns are so woven with BS and lies, like trying to pick apart what that CPA has done to mitigate their tax responsibility or their tax debt is unbelievable. Like you will spend forever trying to figure out what's going on in some of the tax returns, especially if there's some of the ones like I have seen. So anyway, it's not necessarily a red flag when a seller doesn't want to provide their tax returns. It is probably going to mean that you're not going to be able to get finance for it. Hey, maybe that's okay. Maybe it's not. And if it's not, there's no sense in begging for those tax returns, because as soon as you do see them and they didn't want to show you to begin with, it's just going to be so full of shit that it's not going to be worth it. Banks aren't going to be able to approve you. Your CPA is going to freak out whenever you're thinking about buying a business like this, and it's all going to be over. So the seller only has downside a lot of times whenever they are showing tax returns, unless they are showing those tax returns so a buyer can get financed. Then we see tax returns, then it's much easier to get. But there are a lot of businesses out there that are very profitable, very well run. Sellers just lied on their tax returns so much that they don't want to show it. Hey, still a good business, maybe not a good business to get financed though. So anyway, hopefully this helps out a little bit. Take care, talk soon.